socialist of colour and the 1987 Caucus and be a part of this work. Just saying we support it is not good enough anymore. The Tories have decimated youth services, our NHS, our education system, all of which, as we know, have had a disproportionate effect on BAME communities. I am standing because I want to lead an inclusive, radical, anti-racist Young Labour that is ready to fight the Tories at every single turn. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ellie. Next up, we have Jess.
Thank you. I just want to echo the thanks that have already been said for organising this and for the work that you do in the 1987 Caucus. My name is Jess Barnard. I'm also standing for Chair of Young Labour and really pleased to be joining you today. It's the first Hustings we've had all together, so I'm really excited to see what we've got in store. So I just want to say, you know, it's important that we recognise today that historically and currently the Labour Party has failed and is failing to make the changes and take the actions that it should have to progress representation of Black members and champion and deliver anti-racist policies. And that's, you know, a community level and at national and international level as well. My experience in politics is based in organising in my community and building alliances to achieve change. I've been involved in anti-fascist organising where I live, and in my job as a youth worker, I support young people who develop campaigns from anti-racist campaigning to campaigning around mental health. And that's fundamental to everything that I do. As Chair of Young Labour, I pledge first and foremost to listen to people of colour in our party and to do everything within my power to build a diverse, accessible youth wing, which is accountable to its membership, but also is political in standing by the policies that we need to deliver to tackle racism in our society. With the COVID crisis, economic crisis on the horizon, and the impacts of climate crisis already affecting people in the global south, we face years and years of turbulence ahead, and young people will be some of the hardest hit of this period. So as Young Labour, we have a responsibility not only to hold the Tories to account at every single stage, but also to make sure that the Labour Party does not shy away from these challenges and that it's at the forefront of the battle against discrimination and dismantling a system that has failed our entire generation. So I'm pledging to deliver a political education programme which is rolled out to every single young member and made accessible with a funding scheme to make sure that working class young people aren't shut out of education. And that includes cultural awareness training and anti-racism education, including on anti-Semitism and identifying it in society. I'll also be calling for Young Labour to be at the forefront of supporting campaigns and movements for change. So that includes climate strikes and things like Black Lives Matter and all of the groundbreaking movements that we've seen over the past few years. And lastly, I'll be making sure that our trade unions and the work of young workers is fundamental to everything that Young Labour is doing to address the precarious work and low pay that young workers are currently facing. So thank you, and I look forward to answering questions and talking more about all of that later on.
Thank you, Jess. So for our first topic for the first question, it's on culture within Young Labour. And in this Young Labour election, we've already seen 5 major candidates of colour being harassed, abused or threatened, with 4 major candidates also dropping out due to this. This exemplified the toxic culture that plagues Young Labour. How will you take personal responsibility to change this culture and make Labour a more welcoming place for younger members? We're going to start for this question with Ellie and then we'll proceed on after. Oh, muted again.
I'm muted again. I'm so sorry. That's such an important question. I mean, we've seen it firsthand. We've also seen it with the bullying of a 16-year-old. We've seen it with the bullying of BAME and Black members. And it is such an important question. It's something that really, really needs to be addressed. I think while for so long has had such a toxic culture of bullying, and it's really turned young members, especially people who are already marginalised, like the Black community, away from politics and away from the Young Labour structures and the Young Labour network, which we know at the forefront is so important and the most important thing when it comes to the Labour Party. So firstly, I would like to give my full solidarity to Malia Reza. She's a fantastic activist who receives an absolutely astonishing amount of abuse. Her replies are a cesspit of Islamophobic and misogynist abuse. And I think we can all say that, you know, misogyny is bad enough. I'm sure we've all received it. But on top of that, being a BAME woman, being a person of color, like that, it must be horrific. I think we have to ensure that POC activists on Twitter, and for that matter, trans activists, LGBT activists, women activists, all of these marginalized groups get abuse they get so much abuse on Twitter. We need to tweet our solidarity, offer private solidarity, and take on these bullies and abusive members ourselves, instead of leaving the burden on those getting attacked. Institutionalized racism is an endemic part of our society and is embedded in our institutions. And it's quite frankly disgusting that it's the same situation in a lot of ways as the 90s, with the Stephen Lawrence murders, to now with young and predominantly Black men and women dying at the hands of cops in America and in the UK. People in the past have thought that supporting POC activism was just doing an event during Black History Month, and it's unacceptable. I would meet with representatives from the SOC, from the LBN, the 1987 Caucus, attending their hustings later on this month, and ask what and how they need support and what initiatives they think YL can make and do. We need to go back to these groups. We need to ensure that we are listening to these groups. I mean, the three of us, we are white women. We are not people of color. We are not Black. We cannot truly understand what goes on and what the situation is for marginalized groups without going back to you guys and without talking to you and listening to you. And so that's what I pledge to do. I pledge to listen to you always.
Thank you, Ellie. Next up, we have Jess.
Thanks, Otis. Yeah, just to echo what Ellie said there, it's absolutely disgraceful that any young member would be facing, being forced out of an election, and to be facing racism in our movement is absolutely abhorrent, and there is no space for it, and there should be a completely zero tolerance policy for this. I have watched in concern as we've seen not only, young Labour members engage in this, but also senior Labour Party members play into when media are looking to run exploitative headlines or to put BAME young members in a position where they're looking to create hysteria around things that they've tweeted and targeting them. So I think it's really important that we tackle this culture in Young Labour, but also within the wider Labour Party. There needs to be a complete zero tolerance to racism, but also the Labour Party's efforts in safeguarding is absolutely way below the standard that we should be meeting. So I've called for the party to train up a safeguarding officer and have a well-known key contact for every young member in every single region as a minimum, to make sure that when young members face discrimination, bullying, harassment, whether that be from fellow members or members of the public, that they have a key contact that's trusted that will support them through this process, because no young member should be put in the position where they are facing abuse purely for being involved in the Labour Party, or because of the colour of their skin, or because of their ethnicity, or because of their religion. So we need to make sure that the party is putting all of its efforts into combating this. Along with that, we need to be making sure that we aren't just doing the bare minimum in that. So currently Young Labour doesn't have its liberation officers in roles because we were barred from holding those elections. But the party's response has been to not collect the data so that we can hold those ballots online. So I will be calling for those that data to be collected, for the resources to be allocated to do that, to make sure that we have our liberation officers on the committee. But in the meantime, the Young Labour National Committee needs to be meeting with groups like 1987 Caucus, with Socialists of Colour, to make sure that we are listening to all voices and that we are accountable to members in addressing racism inside the party and outside of it.
Thank you, Jess. I'd just like to remind all candidates, try and keep responses down to 90 seconds. Next up, we have Cathleen.
Okay, so that was a great question. I think, we have to acknowledge that this problem exists. I think there's been a long period of time in Young Labour's history where we've chosen not to acknowledge the problem that Young Labour activists face. That's totally not good enough. And if I become chair, that stops right away. I think we have to acknowledge that there is a problem and then look as to how we can realistically solve it. It's great to do things on Twitter, but we also have to be present offline as well. I think we have to have a zero tolerance approach. And that for me means creating a code of conduct and a constitution, a disciplinary process that is linked to the main party, but is also exceptionally for young Labour activists. What do I mean by that? I mean, we all have Labour values, we all have things that we signed up to when we joined the party, but to be honest, some people aren't exhibiting those behaviours. It needs to be really clear about what behaviour is and isn't acceptable. There needs to be lines in the sand for, you know, we can have debate, we can have discussion, but the minute it gets hurtful, or the minute it gets abusive, or the minute it gets racist or rude, it has to stop. I think the best way to do that is to make sure we have a clear code of conduct that's specific to young Labour, a clear constitution that's specific to young Labour, an understanding of the behaviours that we expect in line with our Labour values, and is making sure that everyone on the National Committee has those behaviours and exhibits those behaviours on a day-to-day basis. And that's the beginning of what will be a very long process of detoxifying young Labour. And it's going to be a long process because we've had a really tough time with it in the past couple of years, but we have to just say, like, this needs to stop, this needs to end. We're not going to create a fantastic environment for young people, and we're also not going to win any elections if we're just turning young voters off and turning young activists off, instead of finding and recruiting the people that we need to put a winning campaigning force.
Thank you, Kathleen. The next topic for the next question is safeguarding, which many of you have just touched on, but we'd like to go a little bit deeper into it. So the question goes, with one under 18 candidate receiving sexual assault threats during this younger Labour election, it's quite clear that safeguarding has failed during the scenario to protect young members. What changes do you think need to happen in order for better safeguarding to our members? And to start this question, we have Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, I did touch on my thoughts on developing a safeguarding policy. I'm just appalled to hear that an under 18 member has experienced that in our movement. And I think worryingly, as I'm aware, hasn't really been contacted by the party as I last was made aware on this, which absolutely isn't good enough. I work in safeguarding. I work with young people from the age of 11, so it's something that is really quite important to me, and I don't believe that the Labour Party has put enough resources into this. Our safeguarding team at HQ is relatively small and not equipped to deal with the vast membership that we had, you know, at one point of around 100,000 members in Young Labour, but also we have a duty to safeguard adult members as well. So this should be a huge priority for the party to make sure that every member is safe, protected and supported in everything that they do when they're engaging in Labour. So training up safeguarding officers in every region is a starting point. Making sure that people have a point of contact that they feel able to go to, trusted, and can seek support or advice is really important, because at the moment our complaints procedure is alienating. It can be really drawn out, and often you'll be left for a really long time without communication about what's happening with your case. And often you just need that support to get to that stage of being able to make a formal complaint in the first place. So firstly, that is what I would like to see. But also we need to look at this at a CLP level, because I've heard from countless young members that when they've gone to CLP meetings or events, that they felt something inappropriate has happened, they haven't felt welcomed, they felt unsafe. And so we need to make sure that we're rolling out this training to CLPs. And when CLPs, you know, not conducting this training with their officers or with their members, we need to say that it's not good enough and hold members accountable, because every single member has a duty to keep our young members safe. That's not just nationally, but that is locally at every single level as well. So I would like to see the party roll out to make sure that every CLP and every young member in every community is kept safe and supported. I'm out of time now.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kathleen.
So as I said unfortunately on my earlier answer, we have to just acknowledge that this is a problem. Like, this is really terrible. I've heard some absolutely terrible stories. I'm sure the other two candidates here have you know, witnessed terrible things, and horrible things have been said to them online or offline, and it's totally not good enough. And we can never go back to a position where this is acceptable again, to be quite honest. This has to stop now. So I think the best way to do this is to make sure that there are links between the safeguarding team and Labour HQ and young candidates, especially those under 18. I don't know about the two candidates, but I'm yet to hear from any safeguarding officer in the Labour Party or the Young Labour Party, if they have one. I'm yet to hear any kind of contact from anyone saying, okay, well, if you've got an issue, here's the procedure, or if you've got an issue, this is how we can sort it. I'm yet to hear any kind of contact. I'd also say I'm lucky enough to be endorsed by Open Labour, and there are two very clear safeguarding officers, and I know exactly who they are, and I know exactly how to contact them if I have an issue, and I know it can be brought to them in a confidential manner, and that they could sort it out. I've put in complaints with the party before about other people's behaviours, and I haven't heard back for 6 or 9 months. So that's just not good enough, and we can't have that anymore. So we have to establish a link between the safeguarding party at HQ. If we can have one in Young Labour, that would be amazing. But we have to establish a link so that when a Young Labour member puts in a complaint, or is this, how do they do that? What's the process? There's then not an ignorance for 6 months. That's what I'm just going to finish there. There you go.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Nailed it,
And
Almond.
finally, we have Ellie.
I keep being on mute. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Thank you so much for asking this question. I mean, I think I've seen it with so many young women in the Labour Party. I've seen it with myself. I receive so much abuse, and I've been myself scared to go to the complaints process, to go through the complaints process. I don't know what the complaints, well, I didn't know what the complaints process was. And I was incredibly worried and incredibly scared, incredibly anxious to go forward, to put my name forward, to even be open that I'd received abuse, I'd received sexual harassment by older men in the Labour Party. And it has to stop. And we need to make sure in Young Labour, where we've got the most vulnerable members, where we've got the youngest members, we need to ensure that it stops right away, that it ends completely. I want to echo what Jess has said and Jess's comments on the parties failing in safeguarding young candidates in this election. Every member should feel supported in coming forward. I think we currently have safeguarding officers in maybe 1 or 2 regions, but these officers are not clearly signposted, and these officers probably don't, or certainly don't have the training that they should have. There is not clear signposting, there is not clear awareness, there isn't a faith in the complaint system, and young people do not feel supported. We have to lobby the Labour Party for quicker, clearer processes, especially on regional level, and we know that this is support and equal. There is support and unequal across regions, so we need to equalise that.
Thank you, Ellie. The next question is on being Black in Labour, and Bernie Grant said during the 1984 Labour Party conference, "You see, our problem is that Black people are not a priority in the Labour Party and trade union movement at the moment." Do you agree with this statement? Do you agree with the sentiment of some that these words under Keir Starmer's leadership still hold true? How would you hold the leadership to account on anti-racism? To start this, we'll go to Kathleen.
Okay, so yes, I think he's completely right. No, I don't think it's improved specifically since when Bernie Grant made that speech, made that statement. It hasn't improved. We might as well just be honest about it. Keir hasn't done enough. But there's a way in which to work with him to make things better. The way not to do it is to go online and call people out, or to use a Labour Rose like a picture just to call people out unnecessarily. But the way to do it is to work with colleagues and work with affiliates and work with our trade unions to make a better future for us and to make a better opportunity for young members and young Black members especially. There's no doubt that they're underrepresented, and there's no doubt that that's completely not good enough. I would say is that there's no safeguarding, there's no opportunities, especially for young Black men. The Bernie Grant programme is fantastic, but it's not signposted enough. People don't know that it exists, and they don't know how to apply and get on it. And that's got limited spaces. So we need to, if that's increasing funding, to open them up and maybe making sure young Labour members are able to directly go into a programme like that, making sure we're signposting development pathways so that if people want to get involved into our movement, they feel like they're in a welcoming environment that then can push them on to, if they want to be policymakers, if they want to be activists, if they want to be leaders, if they want to be the next MP, if they want to be the next Bernie Grant, we should be able to put them in a situation and an environment where we can help them. And that for me is the most important thing to do. I think that's the key for young Labour members, and that's the key for me if I become chair.
Thank you, Kathleen. And next up, we have Ellie. Muted.
Sorry. I will stop that. But no, that's such a brilliant question. I absolutely agree with what Bernie Grant said. Black people and marginalised people are not a priority in Labour, and they haven't been for so long. They have to be supported. They have to be upheld in everything that we do and everything that they do. As a movement, we need to be a part. We need to share, we need to be comradely. We need to share each other's experiences and each other's plights. And we can't do that if there are marginalised groups within Labour. I think young people have traditionally been at the forefront of change within the Labour Party, and Young Labour should absolutely call out racism from the main Labour for the main Labour Party. We have so much work ahead of us to reform the Labour Party and the marginalisation of Black people in the party, and it's been a problem. It's been a problem for time immemorial, and it's a problem with this leadership. We need to stand up, we need to be heard, we need to ensure that young people are shouting from the rooftop, shouting from anywhere they can, that this is unacceptable, that racism in the party, wherever it might be, is unacceptable, and we have to change that, and we need to stop that.
Thank you, Ellie. And finally, we have Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with that statement and recognise that from what I've witnessed, I think it has become quite a worrying issue, and Keir has really failed a lot of members who wanted him to stand by movements against racism, and by Black members especially. You know, Black Lives Matter is a movement, not a moment, and it really upsets me that Black and BAME young members would feel that the party isn't a place for them anymore. So we have a huge way to go in making sure that that is not the case, and to make sure that, you know, that the Labour Party is a welcoming, diverse and genuinely anti-racist space, both in our politics but in our conduct as well. I recognise like this is the huge scale challenge, and I'm not going to say that I think that this can be changed overnight, but it is the responsibility of every single one of us to challenge racism and to hold the Labour Party to account wherever we see it, whatever faction we're in. It's the duty of every single one of us. I want to see, in particular, organisations within the Labour Party given more resources, so particularly BAME Labour becoming an autonomous and properly resourced movement within the party, but also organisations like yourselves to be given the spaces, and for members of the Labour Party to listen when change is being called for. I also think there is a case for compulsory anti-racism training for all staffers, MPs and councillors within the Labour Party, and encouraging this to be conducted in CLPs, because of the conduct that I've seen of some MPs and councillors over the last few weeks online has been really worrying and really alienating for Black members in our party. So we have a huge way to go in making sure that this is a priority, that representation is addressed, but also that we address racism wherever we see it in society as well.
Thank you, Jess. I just want to remind viewers at home, you can keep along with the conversation by using the hashtag 1987 Hustings. And we'll now move on to our fourth question. The fourth question is under the topic of underrepresentation. So, with only 3 Black male MPs within the Parliamentary Labour Party, no Black men elected within the NEC, and a certain lack of Black staffers within the Labour Party HQ, Black men within the Labour Party are extremely underrepresented. Why do you think there is a lack of Black males in positions of power in the Labour Party, and how do you plan to change this if elected? We'll start this question with Ellie. Muted.
I'm so sorry. First of all, thank you so much for asking this question. They are horrific, or there are horrific statistics for how bitterly underrepresented Black men are, especially in the Labour Party. You know, obviously we have brilliant organisations like the 1987 Caucus, which was set up to ensure that Black men would be represented. But obviously there is so much more to be done, and there is so much more that the Labour Party have on it to do and to change. I think we need to ensure that the Labour Party keeps up and is the first and foremost in society at every level to ensure that our marginalised groups are represented. We need to ensure that we are the first to ensure that there is representatives from the Black community, from Black men. We need to be the first, and we need to be at the forefront of that debate, and we need to be at the forefront of that movement. Obviously we've got something like the Bernie Grant, or we've got things like the Bernie Grant leadership program, which is fantastic, but as Kathleen pointed out, you know, not enough people know about that. It's not widely spoken about in the Labour Party, and we need to ensure that these programs and these organizations like the 1987 Caucus are put at the absolute forefront of the party and at the absolute forefront of our mission to get Black men involved and get Black men and give Black men the space to be able to talk up, to be able to be themselves, to be able to be the best leadership, to be a part of the Labour Party.
Thank you, Ellie. And next up, we have Jess.
Thank you. I think there's a few tiers to this, and I think it's important firstly to talk about our politics, because our politics need to be explicitly anti-racist. Otherwise, why would Black members want to represent and engage with the Labour Party if it's not interested in addressing the struggles that they have faced? So firstly, I think that that's really important to make sure that we are listening to Black members, Black communities, and that we're proposing anti-racist positions and taking action where we see it. That's really important. But also when we're talking about class politics, making sure that it's intersectional and making sure that, talking about socialism means fundamentally talking about anti-racism movements as well, and embedding that into every conversation that we have. I know that the 1987 Caucus have called for some action to be taken, and I'm particularly supportive of all-BAME parliamentary selection lists, which I think will go some way to addressing some of the inequalities that exist and the underrepresentation that exists. The Bernie Grant leadership programme, which has already been mentioned, absolutely brilliant, but also another element of the party that still needs a huge amount of resourcing, and also making sure that it's accessible to people who maybe don't have the resources to attend, or maybe need financial support to engage in that. So we need to make sure that we make these programs as accessible as possible to give people the widest opportunity to engage with them. We also need to make sure that we are addressing inequalities that exist in CLPs, where I think a lot of, from what I've seen, Black young members have been put off or sidelined or marginalised or boxed into a sort of tick box role, and making sure that that isn't the case, and to make sure that we offer every opportunity to Black members in the party at every level. And obviously I mentioned before about our liberation roles and the Labour Party's delay in collecting the necessary data to make sure that we can conduct OMOV elections in those areas too. And I think that that is really important too. Sorry, I've run over again, so I'm going to end there.
Thank you, Jess. Next up, we have Cathleen.
Thank you. Yeah, just to touch on what the two candidates said, the Bernie Grant leadership program is obviously very good, but there's not enough people that know about it. There's not enough people that are encouraged to apply, and then there's not enough processes where people can get involved if they don't want to do that, or if they want to do other things, or if we could expand that in its current sense and maybe create something for young members to do as well alongside that. I think that would be amazing. So we know this is a big problem, and like, of course, we all know there's only 3 Black men in the Parliamentary Labour Party as is. That's totally not good enough. We've been taking Black voters, especially Black men, their votes for granted for way too long. And if the 13th of December taught us nothing, it's that nothing is taken for granted and that everything is losable, but everything is also winnable. So we are totally able to change this now if we act quickly. I think this is where my 20 paid youth organisers really comes into its own, because we're able to go out and find those next fantastic young members, and we are go out and find those community leaders and people that are making the difference in their ward or in their student housing block or whatever it is where we could find them, or online. And we are able to take them and put them into a movement and make sure that they can grow and give them the tools that they need to succeed. I think we need to have that. That is the basic minimum we need to have in order for us to create a better party, create a better Young Labour, and actually start winning some elections. I think that would be pretty good. Getting some good people into Parliament to represent us, and finally start to see some good representation and more of it when we can find it. And that would be amazing to see.
Thank you, Kathleen. Question 5, the topic is police. And the question is, do you think that the police in the UK is institutionally racist? Why or why not? And how should the Labour Party approach this topic of crime and justice? We'll also start this with Kathleen.
Okay, so I volunteer with the Stephen Lawrence Trust. So I actually see this on a weekly basis when I volunteer with them, which is people are in a desperate situation, especially in some communities in cities and in towns. I think we have to change the way that we think about crime, and we have to challenge that internally and challenge that externally as well. I know exactly how bad the situation is. I've seen it. I've grown up in London. I've seen it too. It's a really terrible situation. The best thing for us to do now is to support, is to find those new young members, is to go out into our communities and recruit the best people that we can, and to give them the tools to be able to succeed, give them the tools to be able to take on the police or to challenge the police if they want to give them the tools to connect with the leadership, to connect with the shadow leadership team, and make sure that we are able to produce a good policy and we are able to stand up for our members at every single opportunity. As Young Labour chair, that would be one of my main concerns, is making sure that young Black members are heard, and they are heard consistently, and they are not just heard during Black Lives Matter month, they are heard for the entire year. And it's making sure to have consistent links between communities and the leadership team, and people that represent us, and whether that's at a local community, whether that's in a local council, whether that's at a CLP, making sure that we can have good representation. We would hope to give members the tools that they need to be successful. And I hope that I'd be able to do that. And if there's one thing you can get from my answers, is that I don't know all the answers, but I want to give the tools to people to succeed.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next up, Ellie. Mute.
Thank you so much. We need to listen to Black voices and Black communities, and people need to realise that police brutality and institutional racism in the police force isn't just a problem in the US. It is a problem here too. Cases like those of Mark Duggan show that the UK is not innocent either. And as if we need proof of that, but we are not innocent. We need to work hard now. We need to ensure that everyone and everybody is talking about institutional racism in the police, in our government. Wherever there is organisation, there is institutional racism, and we need to change that now. We as white allies need to do better at explaining concepts and sentiments behind, say, like ACAB and defund the police. We can't just leave that to our Black brothers and sisters. We can't leave that to our comrades in the BME community. We need to take the onus upon ourselves, and we need to ensure that we speak up, that we explain problems, we explain what institutional racism is, and we explain why the police need serious reform.
Thank you, Ellie. Next up, Jess.
Thank you. Yes, I do believe that the police are institutionally racist, and there is no two ways about that. There's no correlation between increasing levels of police and decreasing levels of crime. Simply, it just means further racial profiling and over-policing of Black communities. And so when the Labour Party is taking positions on policing, it should be really aware of making statements about increasing police and what this would mean for Black communities. Example of this is 1 year at Notting Hill Carnival, there were 10 times more police than at that year's secret garden party, which was offering free drug testing. It just shows the disparity of the institutional race that exists in the organisation and the way that white people and Black people are treated differently by the police. So I'm absolutely calling for a defunding of the police. In the meantime, though, the Labour Party needs to be calling for new legislation to end racial profiling that police currently engage with, to hold police brutality to account legally and make sure that when people are killed in police custody or face abuse or discrimination by the police, that they are held to account, because it's absolutely appalling the numbers that have gotten away with this. But also we need to design legislation to protect Black communities and retract the legislation that was introduced deliberately to target Black communities. Alongside that, I have recently seen some Labour councillors sharing Blue Lives Matter content, which is absolutely abhorrent. So we need to be educating all members, but also making sure that we let elected representatives of the Labour Party know that's completely unacceptable, and we need to hold them to account in that situation.
Thank you, Jess. Question 6 relates to trade unionism and the labour movement. According to the TUC Equality Audit in 2018, BAME workers and young workers are underrepresented as union members and union positions. How would you champion trade unions within Young Labour, especially with Young Labour members of colour? We're going to start this question with Jess.
Thank you. Yes, and that's particularly worrying given that BAME young workers are often most likely to be in precarious work or in care work, where we have seen the government be completely slow to implement proper PPE to keep them safe. So they will be the workers that are struggling in the coming economic crisis, and we absolutely cannot be slow to make sure that we have Black and BAME voices at the forefront of our trade union movement. I have pledged to hold a Young Labour, Young Workers conference, which we've never done before, but is absolutely essential at this time. And within that, I would make sure that allocated places were made for Black young workers, to make sure that our Young Workers conference reflects the diversity of our workforce at the forefront of our society. So firstly, that's essential because the struggles that Black young workers face will be different to the struggles that other workers face, and they will face discrimination in the workplace, and it's essential that we address that, and that the party is listening to Black young workers to make sure that when we are looking at whether that's organising strike action, whether that's how we're showing solidarity, that isn't being glossed over, because while there is underrepresentation in our trade union movement, that will continue to happen. So we need to make sure that we work with every trade union to ensure that Black and BAME young members and young workers are fully engaged within their trade unions, and that the trade unions are listening to them. I'm involved in Unite and GMB, and I know GMB have taken some action to address this, but it needs to go much further, and we need to make sure that in Young Labour we're allocating the time and the resources and listening to Black young workers.
Thank you, Jess. Next up, we have Cathleen.
So it's no surprise that the government is treating workers badly once again, and there's also no surprise that Black men and Black workers are being treated the worst. We've seen that again. We've just come out of austerity, and we're about to go into another jobs crisis at the hands of this callous Tory government. So Young Labour has to have a strong and year-round partnership with trade unions. It can't be a one-off event, and it can't be on Twitter. It needs to be in every CLP. It needs to be in every youth Young Labour group. It needs to be in every university Labour club. It needs to be across every single place that we can reach young people. The way to do that is to create a regular series of workshops, which would be accompanied with like a signposting program, so that young people know how to get involved in their trade union, what the benefits of being in a trade union would be, and how that they can grow and develop, and how they could use their trade union membership to grow and to become better. I think we have to consistently push for that. It can't just be a one-off event. Sorry, Jess, I disagree. It has to be something that happens over a long period of time. It has to be something that connects with every single young worker. And this is exceptionally important because we're about to go into another jobs crisis. There's no doubt about it that young people deserve better from this government. But one place they do have refuge and they do have help is the trade union movement. And I'm really, really clear on making a consistent link between young members and their trade union. If we're able to do that, I think we could start building a successful Young Labour that actually manages to connect with unions and to connect with our workforce whenever it is that they enter the workforce. And of course, we know Young Labour members are more likely to have low-paid jobs, and of course, Young Labour members are more likely to have employment that's not guaranteed. And if we've seen throughout this crisis, we desperately need help. We desperately need solid trade unions who are able to communicate with us regularly and to create those regular links. And that's what I do.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ellie.
Thank you. Not on mute this time. This is such an important question. BAME workers face endemic institutional racial discrimination in the workplace. We need to equip young members to do trade union drives, do a national trade union recruitment campaign within Young Labour. I want to work closely with trade unions to promote Black and BAME trade unionist voices. And we need to educate young members, for example, about Black sections in the 80s too, to show how integral Black organising has been in the trade union movement. I am so honoured to be backed by USDOR and Unison and to have their support for my campaign. But there is institutional racism in all of the labour markets. There is and in all of the jobs market that we see. And coronavirus has only exposed that and the cracks that there are in the labour market. We have to ensure that we have a Young Labour that actually connects with young workers, not just students. And we need this we need this by creating stronger links with trade unions. I currently sit on the Young Workers Forum Committee for the TUC, and we need to work, and I will ensure as Young Labour Chair, we need to work with our Black brothers and sisters in the trade union movement, and we need to work to ensure that people of colour and young workers are represented wherever possible, and they are given a voice wherever possible.
Thank you, Ellie. The next question, question 7, relates to party democracy, and it's where we have our first individual question submitted by a Young Labour member. This one is directed to Ellie, and the question is, Ellie, in a recent podcast, you've questioned the recent moves to democratise the party in the past 5 years, saying that most of the reforms have led to failure amongst failure. Do you think that the party should not continue to democratise?
Thank you so much. That's such a good question. I think looking at the democracy in the party, we are leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else and any other party. And it's so refreshing to see where possible that there is democracy. It's so refreshing in the NEC elections that we're running in, that it's democratised. It's so refreshing to have seen what the leadership challenge looked like in this past year. That, you know, women especially could come forward and were able to run. And I know in other political parties, especially mainstream political parties, that just isn't possible. I think with my previous comments, I was speaking at a time where I was on Lisa Nandy's campaign, and I think I was speaking at a time where I was quite frustrated, I think, with certain aspects of the party. I was very frustrated that it has stopped, especially marginalised groups, from being able to put their candidates forward, and for marginalised people to be able to put themselves forward. But I think looking at the party, where we need to improve is where we need to democratise more. You know, we need to ensure that people of colour run in every election where they can. We need to ensure that women and marginalised groups run in every election where they can. And we need to ensure that the marginalised groups are given the voice and the support they need to run wherever they want to.
Thank you, Ellie. So for everyone else, and Ellie, if you so choose to answer, should the Young Labour National Committee be elected through STV instead of first past the post? We use it to elect the leader of the party, so why not Young Labour National Committee if you think not? And do you support proportional representation for the House of Commons, and how will you continue to commit to democratising the structures within the Young Labour, including the student movement? First up, we have Jess. I think you're muted.
Sorry, my mute button got stuck then. So there were 3 parts to that question, I think. So firstly, on STV and first past the post. I mean, I'm open to this. I think so. Obviously, when I was first elected onto the Young Labour National Committee, it was done through a conference. So you had a delegate system, which meant that the vast majority of members couldn't vote, which is obviously not good enough. So we, as part of the democracy changes, actually managed to get OMOV elections for young members, which I think is a huge step forward, because it means that every young member should be able to engage in voting and having their say, which I think is really important. So making our elections as accessible as possible is really important to me, and so I think that that's my priority. In terms of the second one was it proportional representation?
In House of Commons, exactly. And then the third was democratising structures within Young Labour, including the student movement. Okay,
I'll try and be really quick because I want to touch on both of these. I think that it's really important that we think about proportional representation. The current situation obviously has left us and smaller parties having much less influence in the House of Commons, and the Tories' changes that they're trying to implement constitutionally are really undemocratic and a huge concern to us right now. So we need to be fighting those at every turn. I know that the Labour Party is doing a lot of work on this, and locally that's the case as well, with councils trying to change seating arrangements to shut out Labour majority areas. So we need to be making sure that we address that. But also I think it's important to say, as much as I think PR may solve some problems, there are some problems it may cause, and so we need to think about that and put the research into this. Lastly, with student representation in student wings. We absolutely need a democratic, autonomous body. The previous Labour student structures that we've had are completely unacceptable, and I really hope that the current NEC listen to students and make sure that they implement the student structures that our students are calling for and they deserve.
Thank you, Jess. Kathleen?
Sure. So just to pick up on some of those points, STV is a great idea. I think it was an open Labour campaign that was very successful in getting STV on the NEC, and that's fantastic to see. I think more democracy is always a good thing, and if you don't like democracy, it's because you don't like the answer that democracy might bring. I think that especially on the NEC at the minute, we're seeing slightly less factionalism and slightly less of a toxic culture. And I think if we maybe could have these in young Labour elections, people wouldn't feel the need to be kind of as toxic and as rude to each other, and there wouldn't be an either-or candidate. You could vote maybe in preferential terms, and people would allow, I think, the competition to open up. I think that'd be a good thing. Just to address, I think PR could be a great idea, actually. I think we need to make sure that there's a link between the constituent and their local representative, and that link is strong. I think that's a priority of the Labour Party. It should always be a priority of the Labour Party. So if we can do that, I think PR is a great idea as well. Knowles, just to briefly touch on it, I think it needs to be scrapped and we need to bring in a whole new thing, and it needs to be this understanding that we need to build a better campaigning force in all of our universities and all of our higher learning colleges and anywhere that Labour students exist. And that's to start winning campaigns and winning elections and not being factional and not being, feeding into that toxic culture. It's time to end that now. And as Young Labour chair, I would really hope that we could set up a better version, and a version that is inclusive and welcoming to everyone. And I think I'm confident that I would be able to do that if I was elected Young Labour chair. Thank you,
Kathleen. And finally, Ellie, any other points you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really interesting sort of question, or three-part question. I think we absolutely need one member, one vote within our student memberships and our student elections. The way the party has done the registration process, especially for student members like myself, has been really difficult, especially getting student members to join during Freshers Week. We don't know how brilliant the student wing could be, and I think with one member, one vote, we could achieve something there. We need to have an open party. I think STV for the NEC is good. I think STV wherever possible is good. This change to how we elect the NEC makes it more representative of our membership, and I massively support that. Having STV for Young Labour elections would probably be a really, really good thing, but it needs to come from our young members, and I would delegate to our young members to see what they wanted. If they wanted STV, then absolutely I would fight tooth and nail to make that happen. PR is a really, really interesting concept. I would take lead from Weil policy on this, of course, but I think that we need to ensure that it's something that is explored. I think first past the post is defunct, it's not democratic, and it serves the Tory party very well. It doesn't serve voters at all. We need to ensure that voters, where possible, get the representation they need and get the voice they need, and first past the post simply doesn't offer that. So PR is something to be explored. I think other things are to be explored too, but FTFP as it stands is not good at all.
Thank you, Ellie. Question 8 refers to anti-Semitism within the party, and this has got another individual question, and this one has been directed at Jess. The question goes, Jess, you said in your application for the JLM endorsement that you think it's vital to restore trust with the Jewish members of the party. Does this mean that you now regret standing with Chris Williamson long after the JLM and other Jewish community organisations had called for his suspension?
Thanks, Otis, and thank you for that question. So firstly, I want to offer my solidarity with Jewish members who have been let down by the party over the past few years, and who've been hurt by the actions of people like Chris Williamson and other members who have denied the existence of anti-Semitism in our movement, which I found completely unacceptable. I don't support Chris Williamson. I haven't, and I did support the party's decision to suspend him. That has been my position for a really long time. I spoke at a Christmas event as an invite from young members. Now, as a councillor and as somebody who is an anti-racist campaigner and has been organising anti-fascism movements in my area, I often have to face people head on, and I have to do my bit to make sure I mobilise people who are anti-racist, who are the upcoming generation, who are going to tackle these issues. So while I don't want to see people like Chris Williams in our movement, and I absolutely believe the party should have suspended him, and I'm pleased that they did, it is for us to make sure we engage young members and make sure that we are occupying these spaces, not letting people who don't represent our movements and don't represent our values have those spaces.
Thank you. The wider question is, the past few years within the Labour Party has been blighted with anti-Semitism, with the last chair of Young Labour receiving horrible abuse online. As chair, how would you combat anti-Semitism and ensure that the Labour Party is a safe space for our young Jewish comrades? First up, we have Cathleen.
So this time last year, I went on Sky News, and when I was asked a question about whether the Labour Party is institutionally anti-Semitic, I said that it was, and I laid the blame at the leader of the opposition's door. It's not good enough. It hasn't been good enough for a while. It especially hasn't been good enough for the past 2 years. And now we have a lifetime of work to make up with the Jewish community to make sure that they're able to feel comfortable and feel welcome back in our movement. I think as Young Labour chair, we've got to be very clear about our Labour values and the code of conduct that we expect from our Young Labour members. There needs to be a zero tolerance for all kind of racism, especially anti-Semitism. And there needs to be an understanding that there's a code of conduct, there's a set amount of behaviours that we expect from all Young Labour members. That includes the committee, and that includes especially the committee's Twitter account, which is not good enough and hasn't been good enough for the past year. It's very, very sad to see such terrible stories from young Jewish members who quite frankly deserve a lot better. And this will take a lifetime to make up, but I really want to work with the Jewish community at every single stage to make sure that this is a road that we can travel together. And it's only when Jewish members feel comfortable back in our party do I think that we've done even a reasonable job at solving this problem. I once again would express solidarity with all the Jewish members in the past few years who have left the party, especially young Jewish members who have had a terrible time of it. I will only be an ally, and I will only do my best to help at every single turn, whether I'm elected chair or not, to help in the fight against anti-Semitism in the Labour movement and in society as a whole.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next up, we have Ellie.
Thank you. This topic has been a stain on our movement and has been a stain on our party for a very, very long time. And we have a hell of a lot of ground to make up, and we are not there yet. We have so much to do to ensure that our Jewish members and our Jewish activists are given a safe place, that they feel safe, they're given a voice, and they have the room to be an activist that they want to be without the abuse that they faced. I firstly want to express my absolute solidarity with all Jewish members who have faced any sort of abuse because they're Jewish in the Labour Party. It's not good enough, and it's disgusting. It's sickening to have seen what's happened over the last especially 6 years with everything that's gone on. And I'm so humbled to have been backed by the Jewish Labour movement. I'm sincerely grateful and thankful for their trust, and I will do everything to uphold that where I can. Every member should feel supported coming forward, and I think we clearly have a safeguarding issue, especially around Jewish members. We need to ensure that we get their trust back. We need to ensure that they're given a safe place. As a Holocaust Educational Trust ambassador for the Northwest, I've done a hell of a lot of work with anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism in our society. And so often I've been asked, what do I think of it as a Labour member? How awful is it to be a Labour member? And oftentimes of being a Labour member, I've been accused of being anti-Semitic, and that's horrific. That's not good enough. No Labour member should be in the party if they show anti-Semitism, if they are racist, and that needs to end.
Thank you, Ellie. And finally, we have Jess.
Sorry, my mute button keeps getting stuck. Just want to firstly offer all my solidarity with Miriam, who I've been on the Young Labour National Committee with for 4 years now. And it appalls me to see the level of abuse that she gets every single day. I don't know how she manages it. It's completely unacceptable. We have a huge way to go with rebuilding faith between Jewish members and the Labour Party and Jewish communities. Our policies have been too slow. We've let Jewish members down. We need to have an explicitly zero tolerance policy to anti-Semitism. Our complaints procedure needs independent oversight. It needs to be much more efficient, but also we need to make sure that we have increased communication with people who are reporting these incidents and who are often left waiting, unsure of what's happening with their case, which really isn't good enough. My complete solidarity with all these Jewish members who've been let down over the past few years. Labour need to do better. We all need to do better. It's the obligation of every single one of us. And as chair of Young Labour, I pledge to do everything in my power to fight anti-Semitism at every single level. And that means embedding anti-racist education within our political education programme and making sure that we fight this and stamp it out wherever we see. In my local party, I was disappointed to see a motion brought which I felt undermined the seriousness of anti-Semitism, and I fought this at a local level. But I think in the initial instance as well, the party should be quicker to make sure that these debates aren't brought into this setting, and that we make sure that we protect all members who face racism and make sure that that isn't up for debate and stamp it out wherever we see it.
Thank you, Jess. Question 9 relates to the topic of Brexit, and this is where we have our individual question for Kathleen. Kathleen, you've mentioned quite a bit with your work with Our Future, Our Choice, a branch of the People's Vote campaign. That campaign has been criticised by some of the party to be undermining the Labour Party in the last few years. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this? And in hindsight, what would you have done differently within the People's Vote campaign?
Sure. So being against Brexit was and is the overwhelming view of the majority of Young Labour members, and of our affiliates and trade unions. I will never apologise. At no stage in my life will I ever apologise for standing up for young members and standing up for Young Labour members. I will never ever stop fighting for them, no matter what anyone else says on Twitter, on or offline. I think we've got to be really clear that, unfortunately, we've left the European Union. We're going to be leaving on what is a deal which is, pretty bad for young people. We've got a jobs crisis. We've just had a decade of Tory austerity, and we're about to go into another one, probably even longer, and young people will suffer the most. There is no Brexit scenario in which young people benefited in any kind of social, any kind of economic way. It does not exist. So therefore, what can we realistically do? Well, don't get mad, organise, and that's what I would hope to do. We need to fight for young people at every single stage and oppose what this government is doing. That means recruiting 20 paid organisers, that means working hard to change the party culture, and that means representing Young Labour members at every level. To be honest, I don't really want to get dragged into this Brexit debate again. The debate has been and gone, but we now need to protect, especially our young workers, but our young members against what will be a disastrous Tory Brexit, timed in with another jobs crisis, another economic crisis, and probably a recession, if not a depression. And that's my priority now.
Thank you. The wider question for this topic is, did you agree with the Labour stance on Brexit during the last general election? If not, what would you have advocated for at the time? First up, we have Ellie.
Thank you so much. I think the Labour stance during the leadership was chaotic. I don't think anyone really understood what the Labour stance was. At the time, I was on the doorstep, I was going out, I was being asked what the Labour Party's stance on Brexit is, and it's confusing. We needed a clear message, and we didn't do that, and we failed there. We failed completely there. I'm from South Wales. I grew up in South Wales. I grew up in an area which predominantly voted Leave. You go into the valleys where I was born, it predominantly voted Leave, and the Labour Party didn't connect with those voters. It was either very, very Remain or confusing, obfuscating, not doing at all good enough to answer what the burning question was what's going to happen to me? So I think moving forward, we need to leave the Brexit debate behind. It's something that has put a dark shadow over our movement for a very, very long period of time. And we need to look forward. We need to look forward onto what happens next after Brexit. We need to ensure that young members, where they can be supported, are supported. We need to ensure that the Labour Party, as soon as possible, gets elected, to ensure that young members are given absolutely every opportunity they have. I think I'm the only one in this panel who didn't get a vote in the Brexit referendum. I was too young to vote. And I think, again, that's disgraceful. We've got a young Labour whose majority membership was too young to vote. And we need to ensure that where they didn't get a say, they have a say now onto what happens next in their future.
Thank you, Ellie. And next up, we have Jess.
Thank you. This is a really tricky question. I mean, I voted Remain and I supported the Remain campaign. But what I saw afterwards was, a campaign which I felt pushed the leadership into a corner, and I do feel like it was weaponized by the media and elements of the party who could see this split in the party between people who felt that we needed to move on from the debate, that the referendum had happened and that we needed to focus on delivering a Labour government, and those who focused on trying to deliver a second referendum. Now, my position was that I felt that it would have been sensible to accept the result of the referendum as much as I wanted to remain. I believe in democracy, and I felt that that was the way forward. And also in my work as a youth worker, when I was talking to young people every single day and these issues are coming up and it was dominating the press, they were saying to me, I don't care. They were just saying, I want this over with. I can't, I refer young people to mental health services, and they were saying, I've been waiting 18 months for an appointment. I'm not able to get the support I need. I can't get a job. My parents can't afford to buy food. I care about these issues. Why is nobody talking about this? And why is all of the debate around Brexit? And while I recognise the difficulties of Brexit and the implications that it might mean for our economy and the negative impacts on young people similarly, we can't allow this to keep dictating our narratives and making sure that we're shutting out discussion around political issues of our time. So I didn't support the position that we took, but obviously I did my duty and I got out on the doorstep and did my best to communicate that message to every single voter in rural areas, in Leave voting areas and in Remain voting areas. But I think moving forwards, we need to find a way to work constructively to find ways forwards on difficult topics like this.
Thank you, Jess. Next up, if Kathleen would like to add anything on.
Yeah, just to very quickly add on, I think it's now time for Young Labour to start advocating to work with our international partners in Europe and our European counterparts, our European socialist neighbours and their parties who haven't really got a relationship with Young Labour as it currently stands. But I've spoken to many of them. I've been lucky enough to speak to people in Ireland, young members in Ireland, and young members in European places as well. They all want to work with Young Labour. They understand that Brexit was a decision, but it doesn't mean that the ties between Young Labour in the UK and Young Labour or young socialist places abroad, those ties don't need to break. We can still keep that going, and we can start building that back up again. That's something that I think the current committee has ignored, and committees in the past have ignored. And we'll look. If I'm lucky enough to be elected chair, I will work with those members who want to help and still want to be part of the Young Labour story and to help us achieve a government in 4 years' time.
Thank you, Kathleen. And for our last question, question 10, it relates to black male socialism. And the question is, name one black male socialist within or outside the Labour movement who inspires you, and explain what inspires you about them. First up, we have Jess.
Thank you. Sorry, my mute button keeps getting stuck. That's a really, really tough question. To pick one, I think it would have to be Thomas Sankara, because he was a revolutionary socialist who implemented lots of change around environmental policies, ecological policies, and programs against inequality, and was also a staunch feminist who spent lots of years writing about that too.
Thank you, Jess. Next up, we have Ellie.
Thank you so much. I've been struggling to think because there are so many examples, but I think I have to say, and he's been mentioned so much in these hustings already, it has to be Bernie Grant. He's pioneered the way for black men in especially the Labour movement. and he pioneered the way for things like the 1987 caucus, and ensured that Black men had that platform and were given a voice. He's pioneered the way for, you know, what we see today and where we can go next. So I'd definitely say him.
Thank you. And finally, Cathleen.
Well, I have to say, Open Labour's Jermaine Jackman, who's doing a fantastic level of work, has gained support from across the UK, and I hope to be able to elect him onto the NEC very soon. He is a fantastic guy with some great policies, and he has a fantastic career and a fantastic journey ahead of him in our Labour movement and in hopefully British politics. I'm also going to take an opportunity to promote one of my friends, Atian. Atian has done some fantastic work in drawing an opportunity and the line between austerity and knife crime. And I think that he's done fantastic work in campaigning locally and hopefully nationally one day soon. He is just one example of a fantastic movement that's coming up of young people who deserve better and demand better on a day-to-day basis from their local representatives. The future is bright for Atian, let me tell you that now. And I'm glad I've said that on record so I can come back in 10 years' time and be proved right.
Thank you. So we'll give everyone a chance to do some closing statements, anything they want to wrap up. And with that, we'll start with Cathleen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here. I think this has been a fantastic hustings. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak to everyone. I've been really clear that the current Young Labour system is not good enough, and we need change very quickly. And that our youth members, our young members need better and they deserve better. The way in which I'm going to do that is by having a zero tolerance approach to bullying, to harassment, to bigotry. I've said that earlier, I'm going to say that again. Another way in which we can improve Young Labour is to affiliate and to use our links between trade unions and affiliates to build links and long-lasting links and to develop those skills pathways and education pathways to give members the tools that they need to succeed. And the last one is to bring Young Labour into the 21st century. The way we do that is by having structure and funding and organisation and safeguarding and ways in which to improve the lives of young members. We've all been, us three candidates have been around the UK. I've been lucky enough to speak to hundreds of young people across in the past 2 years, and we know how fantastic they are. It's just time that we had a chair and it's time we had a committee that is able to give them the tools that they need to succeed, and then we can create a national winning force to provide a real opposition against this Tory government and to build for the future. I'm lucky enough to be the first candidate now to speak to the 1987 Caucus. That was a fantastic experience. I hope to continue that relationship going forward. And I've also seen through my volunteering with Stephen Lawrence Foundation, with their work that trust has done to improve the lives of Black men around the UK. And I've seen firsthand about how tough their experiences have been. And I know exactly what it takes to make those lives and to make those journeys better. I know we have the raw ingredients to succeed, and I would just like to give people the tools that they need to be successful, and that's the reason why I'm running to be your next chair of Young Labour.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next up, Jess.
Thank you. The struggles that we are currently facing are absolutely paramount in having our focus and our attention. Demanding that Labour offers a response that matches up to the scale of the emergency faces young people must be our priority over the coming years. We cannot act like we're scared of our own shadow, and we can't say as little as possible to rock the boat, because that just isn't good enough for young people or for our young members. We're in an economic crisis bigger than anything we've known, and people are crying out for leadership and opposition. Our job as Young Labour and as the party as a whole is to push for the transformation of our economy to one that serves the needs of the many and not the few. As the corona crash hits, millions of people are going to be listening to that argument, because they're going to see that old economic thinking just cannot deliver anymore. The old economics doesn't have the answers for this emergency, and that's going to be staring people in the face. So if we can show them that there is an alternative and that things can be run differently and that needs to be run differently, then we can persuade millions who would normally be beyond our reach to look again and to vote Labour and deliver a Labour government. Because people now know from this virus that public health crises can't be solved by the market, and it can only be solved through collective action. And Young Labour needs to be at the forefront of that collective action. And that means against the climate emergency, the housing crisis, insecure work, inequality, racism. We need to be loud and clear that the only satisfactory response right now for our generation is a radical one, and one that transforms our society, because without it, young people will bear the brunt of this crisis. So as your chair of Young Labour, I pledge to deliver political education for all young members to make sure we mobilise and engage as many young members and young workers as possible. I will deliver a Young Workers Conference to engage young workers into our movement and make sure that these discussions continue as we move forward. I'll make sure Young Labour is an accessible place, one where we have a zero tolerance policy to abuse, discrimination or bullying of any kind. And I will make sure that we listen to young members wherever we may be, and we'll be accountable as a committee to all young members. So vote for me for chair.
Thanks, Jess. And finally, we have Ellie.
Thank you so much. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for organising this event. You've given me a lot to think about and to take away. I look forward to sharing my full manifesto with you. I look forward to discussing what more I can do as chair and as a candidate with the 1987 caucus. Young members in our party should be empowered to engage with our party at every single level, to educate, to inform, and to have their lived experience valued. We have to confront racism that still exists in our movement with a zero tolerance policy on harassment and bullying. It starts with listening to those lived experiences and by reforming our safeguarding measures. And we need to deliver an independent complaints procedure. As soon as I'm elected, I will ensure, if I'm elected, I will ensure that that happens. The Labour Party is all about improving working people's lives. We know that Black and ethnic minority people face structural racism at work, and to transform our society for the better, we have to end this problem right here, right now. We do this by working alongside our trade union brothers and sisters. I know that as a white ally, I need to do more than just call myself an anti-racist. I have to act on it, and that's exactly what I will do if I'm elected chair of Young Labour. I am standing because I want to lead an inclusive, anti-racist Young Labour that is ready to fight the Tories at every single turn and ready to support communities that are about to or have been devastated by coronavirus and Brexit. I know as a candidate from Wales and a candidate who is from outside the southeast, just how devastating and just how heartbreaking these things have been. And I know from a rural area that a lot of people are worried, especially young members, about their future. And I will represent you. I will ensure that people are represented from across the length and breadth of the nation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. I just want to say a big thank you to all three of our candidates for coming. That's been great. Been really great to hear from you. And also a thank you to everyone at home. I'd also like to pass over to Armen, our man behind the scenes, who's been organising this, live tweeting for us and making sure that the live streams are all working.
Yeah, so like I really want to use this opportunity. So hi, my name's Armen Tesfaye. I'm also part of the 987 Caucus, and as Otis said, I've been helping out organising a lot of the stuff behind the scenes and streaming. One thing I do have to say very, very quickly on the YouTube side, if you were watching this on YouTube, you missed Kathleen's opening statement. For that, I am really, really sorry. If you please do check it out. As with all of them, they were really, really interesting to hear. So yeah, this was why the 1987 Caucus was founded. It was founded to be part of, to really push the boundaries of what we need to see as anti-racism within the Labour movement. Black male representation, it's tough to be in the Labour Party, being Black and especially being a Black man or a Black woman. So that was why we were founded, to push for those issues and to confront Black representation at the moment. We will be a pain in the ass for this party, and I'll be very, very clear on that, in order to make the changes that we feel it's possible. So I'll just finish off saying we will continue to be involved with the Young Labour elections, making interventions if we feel necessary. And I'll finish off with thanking all three of their candidates. Each of them have done well in certain areas, and I can't thank them enough for also being available to do this Hustings. I really, really do appreciate it, especially going through some of the questions that were individualized to you. I know that that can be a little bit tough and it can be a little bit confrontational, but I really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot during this. And this is recorded. Everything's going to be recorded. It will be uploaded. So we will hold you to account on this, and we're not afraid to say that. But yeah, we're looking forward to seeing who will win. As far as I'm concerned, all three of you are on the ballot. So we will be very, very we'll be very, very excited to be talking to you, whoever wins, going forward with some of the things that we have in mind. So I'll just finish off saying solidarity and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.